It began with that peculiar warmth a winter night sometimes exhales when it remembers the lungs of August, a hush trembling at the lip of the abandoned shaft, soft as pulse under skin, yet heavy with a hidden heartbeat. Elijah Thorne, 14 years unmade by the sudden vanishing of his father and the slow unravel of his mother's smile, felt the warmth collect around his ankles like bathwater. Mist curled in tight spirals, lit faintly by the single street lamp still courageous enough to burn on the edge of town. In Stonehook, every lamp was a story, and every story carried a fuse. Strike the match and you would smell copper, coal, and regret. He pressed his ear to the rust-flaked grate that sealed the ventilation tunnel, expecting the tinny echo of wind. Instead came a voice, small, as though cramped in the throat of the earth. Elijah, the syllables rasped like gravel dragged across glass. Only one man had ever said the boy's name that way, accent bent with second-hand Polish and the ache of having never seen the sea. John Thorne, Elijah's grandfather, dead 3 winters. The boy wanted to disbelieve, to swallow the moment before it hardened into memory. Yet the breath of the mine reached for him, warm, insistent, smelling faintly of iron filings and half-forgotten prayers. In that instant, every rule of Stonehook childhood, the warnings etched into bedtime stories, the half-truths traded across kitchen tables fell away. The town's adults believed distance kept them safe, but Elijah understood what the warmth meant. Something below had stirred, and it recognized his blood. He whispered, "Grandpa?" The darkness did not answer with words. It exhaled again, deeper this time, and the dust on the grill blossomed outward like spores. The boy's heart shook itself awake. Each beat a pickaxe struck against stone, and the sky above him seemed to lower by inches. From some place beyond sense, he felt the shaft breathing with him, as though their ribs had been stitched together long ago, before memory, before the first shovel cut the hill in two. When he finally pulled away, flakes of rust clung to his cheek. He did not wipe them off. Rust was proof. Rust was a passport stamped by the underworld. He simply stood there under that ragged lamp, half lit and half lost, while the snow began to fall sideways, flakes turned by the mine's unseen convection, spiraling down like grey feathers shaken from an angel's ribcage. In that swirling hush, he understood something simple and terrible. A story buried alive will keep breathing until someone leans in close enough to share its air. And Elijah, with grief blooming behind his eyes and silence itching beneath his skin, found himself inhaling. Stonehook, West Virginia, marked on most highway maps with a dot so small it might be mistaken for a printing error, had been born, thrived, and almost died in the span of 3 generations. Coal first, then copper, then a half-hearted flirtation with manganese that left the company men richer and the water tasting faintly like pennies. When the final seam collapsed 15 years ago, the mine was sealed with bureaucratic cement and a ribbon of caution tape already frayed by the wind. The company vacated, the miners stayed. They stayed because they had nowhere to go, and because the mountain did not release its faithful so easily. Houses leaned toward each other like conspirators, clapboards warped by freeze-thaw cycles that sounded in the night like slow gunfire. A single grocery, a bar called the Exhaust, and a church whose steeple housed more crows than hymns. These were the anchors of daily life. In school, textbooks spoke of macroeconomics and sustainable futures, but the children of Stonehook learned their algebra against the persistent metronome of unpaid bills. Elijah's family home sat 3 blocks uphill from the mine's eastern vent, its porch sagging as though bowed by invisible weight. When Elijah's father Matthew vanished in April, his last sighting a silhouette crossing the ridge at dusk, no one was truly surprised. Men in Stonehook often walked into the forest and did not come back. Some were found tangled in creek beds, some reappeared months later in a different county under a different name. Others became rumors. Grief in Stonehook was less an event than a season. Elijah's mother, Claire, developed rituals around her loss. Each dawn she would scrub the sink until her fingertips bled, muttering recipes her own mother had whispered over simmering pots during the strike of '94. At night she sat at the kitchen table polishing Matthew's boots, knowing he would never again scuff their leather. Her silence was not absence but armor, and Elijah, shoulders hunched like an overgrown bird who feared its own wingspan, drifted room to room sketching shadows on crumpled receipts torn from his mother's apron pocket. The mine, though dormant, still ruled the town's calendar. On February evenings when frost girdled the hills, you could feel it, an undercurrent like distant machinery. Windows rattled without wind, housecats paused mid-prowl, ears twitched toward the valley. Locals blamed settling or gas pockets or trains passing far off. But no one believed those answers, not really. In Stonehook, belief was a whisper. You only allowed yourself beneath thick quilts after the generator sputtered out, when the dark pressed its thumb beneath your jaw. It was in this hush barn roofs sweating with icicles, creek water glazing itself into stillness, that Elijah began visiting the shaft. The place drew him as dreams draw sleepers, not with promise, but inevitability. Some nights he would kneel by the grate simply to feel the vibration of his own name echo back through stone, testing whether the earth still remembered him. Other nights he pressed paper against the metal and sketched the void, shading it until graphite glazed the page like coal dust. The boy's friends, those who still lingered after school, was dismissed to part-time hours, joked about specters and canary ghosts, and the so-called coughing man believed to roam the lowest galleries. Elijah pretended to laugh, but privately he kept lists, names overheard from old Union logs, dates scribbled on the backs of pay stubs found in his grandfather's toolbox, injuries catalogued in county-filed accident reports that never made the company newsletters. He did not know what he was assembling, only that each fragment felt like mortar and somewhere a wall waited to rise. By the first snowfall of December, Elijah understood Stonehook's unspoken commandment: silence is cheaper than truth. Yet the boy, trembling with borrowed warmth and fatherless fury, found himself too empty to hold silence much longer. The mine breathed, he breathed back, and the hollow between those breaths widened, like a doorframe slivered by frost, begging to be forced open. On the solstice, Elijah brought a flashlight whose batteries leaked acid in his coat pocket and an old tape recorder salvaged from the attic's war-era relics. He crept out after midnight, stepping over the snow-dusted heel marks his mother left pacing the porch. A barn owl watched his progress from a fence post, yellow eyes reflecting the moon as twin coins of accusation. At the shaft he knelt, wrists trembling. The grate's bolts were rust-eaten. With effort and a crowbar borrowed from the school's disused shop, he worked one loose. Metal screamed. A single echo fell down the tunnel like a stone dropping through water, swallowed. Fear might have turned him back, but the tape recorder felt hot in his palm, an ember demanding oxygen. He pressed record and spoke into the dark. "If you're there, Grandpa, I'm listening." Silence pooled, thick enough to taste. Then, faint, "Elijah, 8, beam." The words were brittle, half shattered by static, yet clear enough to quicken the pulse. The boy's breath caught. He repeated the phrase aloud, as though saying it would stitch sense into the syllables. 8, beam. He checked his grandfather's map, an oil-speckled sheet discovered months earlier beneath loose floorboards, where each cross-section of the mine was marked in thin black strokes. The 8th crossbeam supported Gallery C, long reported collapsed. Elijah felt gravity shift inside his chest, a subtle tilt toward inevitability. In the days that followed, he played the tape until the magnetic strip began to warp. Every listen revealed a new faint layer beneath the first: choked sobs, foreign prayers, the scrape of boots on gravel. He copied the tape onto blank cassettes and slowed the playback, scouring each second like a detective scanning surveillance footage for ghosts. At 1/3 speed, he discerned new fragments: tell him, truth, burial. The town's library lacked modern records, yet in an overlooked manila folder Elijah found a coroner's inquest dated February 12, 1987. Subject, Radek Tomasz, 37. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. Location, shaft, C8. Witness, John Thorne. Margins were blacked out by a marker that had faded to grey fog. Someone had tried to erase connections. Someone had failed. One evening after curfew, the exhaust's door swung open, and old miners spilled into the street, voices hoarse with bottled time. Elijah listened from the alley. He heard his grandfather's name muttered like a bruise. Should have reported the whole damn thing, but John figured the company'd bury him next. Laughter creaked like rusty hinges, then silence sharper than any punchline. Elijah understood. The mine wasn't haunting him. It was indicting him, summoning a descendant to witness a crime all but collapsed beneath corporate cement. And he felt, with the certainty of snow-burning bare skin, that truth does not rest easy in the dark. It claws, it claws, it claws. Driven by a hunger he could not language, the boy began sneaking into the mine at dawn, slipping past the sagging plywood barrier, boot soles slick with black ice. His flashlight coughed pale cones across ribbed stone, and the hunger inside him sharpened alongside each drip of mineral water. Echoes answered his footfalls, mapping distances his eyes could not. Somewhere ahead, the 8th beam waited. Somewhere still deeper, a voice rehearsed its confession. The deeper Elijah ventured, the thinner the air and the thicker the memories. Phantom images flared behind his eyelids, men hunched over drills, song fragments ricocheting off steel, the sulfuric flare of carbide lamps flickering like wounded stars. These visions were not imagination, they were deposits, veins of unspent grief he was tapping with every breath. He began losing time. One Saturday he descended before sunrise and emerged after dark, unaware 16 hours had passed. His mother, frantic, scoured the valley with a borrowed ATV until she spotted his figure trudging the ridgeline, coat torn, nails black with grime. At home she screamed until her voice fissured, then wrapped him in towels that smelled of bleach and cigarette smoke. He only said, "I had to listen." And somewhere behind his words the mind spoke too, driving her weeping from the bathroom. School slipped from focus, his notebooks filled with frantic drawings of wooden beams cracking like ribs. Teachers sent notes home that went unanswered. On storm evenings he lay awake, hearing the thunder mimic dynamite and seeing, in each flash, silhouettes frozen mid-collapse. The mine, once dormant, now colonized every corner of his mind, its tunnels branching into synapses, blasting corridors through memory. One night Elijah followed a new voice. Higher, reedy, almost childlike, through a gallery he'd never seen mapped. There he found a seam of pyrite glittering in flashlight glare, and beneath it, wedged in shale, the tarnished nameplate of a lamp. Tomash, Ari blood once dried along its rim, now flaked to dust. Grief swelled so fast it stunned him breathless. He pressed his forehead to the rock and begged the darkness for explanation. Instead, the voice repeated a single Polish phrase he translated later. "The living forget, the earth remembers." Sleep became a battlefield, where dreams reenacted disasters in impossible detail. He woke to the taste of copper, convinced a beam of moonlight would collapse the roof. At breakfast he traced fault lines in pancake syrup. His mother watched him, eyes bleak with déjà vu. She had seen the same mania overtake her own father in the months before his death. John pacing hallways, whispering ledger entries like rosary beads. February's end brought freeze rain that coated every surface in glassy armor. Elijah still went to the shaft, crowbar now strapped to his belt, recorder slung around his neck. The mine welcomed him, its breath hotter with every visit, as though the earth's core leaned close to listen in kind. He felt both shepherd and lamb, guiding voices upward, offering himself downward. Friends ceased inviting him to sled or scavenge scrap. They crossed the street when his boots crunched behind them. Rumors spread, Elijah talking to walls, Elijah carving symbols into frozen creeks, Elijah forgetting his own last name until the mine reminded him. A counselor dispatched from the county tried to coax him into an office, smelling of mold and fluorescent hum. Elijah stared at the ventilation duct above the woman's desk, certain it would open into blackness. He said nothing. The mind spoke through his silence, a ventriloquist of dust and shadow. The report labeled him grief-locked and prescribed sedatives his mother could not pronounce. By equinox, the boy's reflection had grown foreign, cheekbones jutting as though the mine had quarried his flesh, pupils wide even in noon sun. Yet somewhere behind rib, beneath lung, a resolve crystallized. The mine had a debt. He had inherited the ledger, and accounting, he decided, cannot be done from the surface. The eighth beam revealed itself during a thaw so sudden the hills wept rivulets that froze mid-flow. Elijah crossed the chain-link barricade, boots sinking into mud that sucked at him like greedy lips. Inside, the air steamed, moisture dripped from the ceiling in fat plops, each echo an expletive. He counted beams as he walked, 1, 2, 3, each marked by sagging timbers that smelled of old sweat and tar. By the seventh his flashlight flickered, but habit kept his stride steady. He had by then learned to navigate by resonance, tap a boot heel, gauge the delay, estimate distance to the nearest wall. The eighth beam was splintered along its spine. Mineral water etched its grain pale as bone. Beneath it yawned a cavity half filled with silt. Elijah knelt and ran his hand through the mud, fingertips brushing something rigid. He dug until nails split, unearthing a length of wool sleeve still gripping a pickaxe handle. Bone poked from the cuff, dazzling white against black slurry. His breath fled. A roar, neither wind nor machinery, rose from deeper within, rattling stones loose, voices layered atop one another. John Thorne pleading in English, Radek Tomasz praying in Polish, a child humming the coalface lullaby. Elijah's father once whistled while tying his boots. They converged into a single polyphonic wail that shook the water into trembling concentric circles. The boy doubled over, palms to ears, yet the sound tunneled straight through skin. Images flashed, his grandfather, helmet askew, dragging Radek's body into a side drift, signing forms under a foreman's glare, burying union dues cash beneath floorboards. Finally, sitting at a kitchen table years later, knuckles bloodied, whispering to a tape recorder Elijah would one day discover. Each vision burned with impossible clarity, as though imprinted on the retina of the mine itself. Lightning forked somewhere miles above. Its pulse rode down steel rails and illuminated the cavity. Elijah saw for the first time the shape of the void. Not random collapse, but a crudely dug niche. Man-made, deliberate. He understood his grandfather had entombed evidence to protect a livelihood that could never truly feed them. He understood the company had counted on such silence. Rage surged, white and clean as limestone. He seized the pickaxe still trapped in Radek's skeletal grip and swung it against the beam. Wood split with a sigh like lungs deflating. Another swing, splinters sprayed. With each strike he heard the voices crescendo, not in pain but in resonance, as though each blow struck chord and memory alike. The ceiling groaned. Dust cascaded like grey rain. Elijah sensed the structure loosening, yet he did not stop. If the mine wanted confession, he would pry it from its ribs. When the beam finally snapped, the tunnel exhaled a gasp of compressed air so hot it singed the hairs on his arms. A landslide of small stones clattered forth, revealing a cavity beyond, a room packed wall to wall with ledgers, pay stubs and a single cassette labeled Collapse 21287. He reached for it, but the floor shifted. Water upchucked silt. His flashlight died. Darkness consumed outline. Then distance, then sound, until the only certainty was the hammering of his own heart echoing in the cavernous hush. Somewhere in that absolute black, the mine whispered one last phrase, "Carry what we could not." Whether the words came from Radek, from John, or from the mountain itself, Elijah could not tell. All he knew was that weight, the mass of unspoken guilt, settled onto his shoulders like a second skeleton, one he could never shed. They found him 3 dawns later, kneeling at the mouth of the shaft, coat caked with mud that had hardened into shell. In his hands, the cassette, cracked but unbroken. His mother's wail fractured the sky. Paramedics wrapped Elijah in silver blankets, but warmth refused entry. When asked what happened, he only said, "I helped it breathe." The tape, once dried, revealed 15 minutes of ragged confession. John Thorne recounting the cave-in, the hush money, the buried body. It named foremen, dated forged inspections, detailed safety warnings ignored for profit. The county prosecutor accepted the evidence. Lawsuits blossomed like fungi across decades-old ledgers. For a moment, brief as sparrow flight, Stonehook believed exorcism possible through paperwork. Yet the mine remained sealed, its breath temporarily muffled by fresh concrete and a chain-link veil. The town waited for quiet that never fully arrived. On windless nights, children still woke crying, claiming to hear hammers beating far below. Mothers shushed them with half-songs, half-prayers. Fathers stared at the ridge, fists clenched around phantom tools. And Elijah, released from hospital, walked the streets with a limp that doctors called psychosomatic, though he felt it anchored in bone. He no longer listened for voices. He carried them. They spoke in the rustle of grocery receipts, in the hush of snow gathering on gutters. When he passed the old church, he seemed to tilt under an invisible yoke, as though hauling unseen carts loaded with ore. A burden, yes, but also a rhythm. The mine's old heartbeat had migrated into him, and with each step he mapped its echo across the cracked sidewalks of Stonehook. People asked whether he felt safer with the truth out. He answered only with a faint smile, because safety had never been the point. The point was breath. Who is allowed to inhale freely, and who is entombed before their lungs can finish a single question? The lawsuits would settle, the headlines would fade, but the shaft's exhalation would persist, slipping through hairline fractures in memory, reminding every generation that beneath comfort lies cost. Some evenings, Elijah stands at the new memorial, bronze plaques listing names once redacted. He closes his eyes, lets winter wind lash his cheeks, and imagines the mine below him still drawing breath, slower now, perhaps gentler, like an animal that has finally been heard. On those nights he wonders whom the earth might speak to next, and whether they will heed its tremor or flee from its warmth. And so the echo travels, unspooled across time, asking anyone who dares pause at the edge of silence. When we inherit the breaths of the buried, do we owe them our own voice or our unflinching listening?